That's Acts 17, page 1113. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well and in the marketplace, day by day, with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean." All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with the inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I am going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands, and he is not served by human hands, as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far away from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead." When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, "We want to hear you again on this subject." At that, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, also a woman named Damaris, and a number of others.
Well, good morning. Happy Easter, everyone. My name is Johnny, and it's great to be together to celebrate Easter. And I just want to take 20 minutes or so to reflect on Easter together. Now, I wonder, you had a chance to talk in your groups. I wonder, what is the best news you ever got? Does anyone want to share what they think the best news they ever got is? No? Yes, Ben? Going to Legoland. Oh, that is pretty good news there. Yes, yeah. Yeah, go on. Go on, Eli. Jesus is alive. Absolutely, and that's what we're celebrating today. That's great news, isn't it? Jesus is alive. Have you got anything else? Another good bit of best news? No? All right, then. What about this one, then? What about this? It's a bit of a harder one. What's the most important news you ever got? It's a bit harder, isn't it? Thea, yeah? To listen to Jesus, that's a really important thing to listen to. Yeah, Maggie, have you got something? Moving house. Yeah, that's very important, isn't it? Because it's going to change. If you forget where you live, then you go to the wrong place, won't you? Yeah. Any adults got any important examples of important news that you've ever got? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it can be good or bad health news, couldn't it? It's pretty important, that kind of situation. Sometimes it might be if you've done a test or an exam and you get the result, or different things like that. It can be all sorts of different things. Even a fire alarm is quite important news when you think about it, because when a fire alarm goes off, you want to listen and you want to act in accordance with that. Sometimes really important news is not always the best. Like if you think of the news that someone you really love has died, that's really important, but it's not the best news, is it? It's really sad. And sometimes the best news is not always really the most important. So if you think about it, I think the best news for me would be if Spurs won the league or if Spurs won the FA Cup. That would be absolutely amazing. Because that doesn't happen very much for a Spurs fan. But let's face it, it's probably not the most important news ever. Because they might win it this season, and the next season it might be Villa or some other rubbish team like that. You never know. It's great news, but not the most important. But sometimes the best news is the most important and is the most life-changing. Even though we don't realize it at the time. That's like when you pass a test or an exam and you feel quite happy about it, but what you don't realize is actually that might just change the whole path of your life because it opens up some new doors for you. What I want us to do today is focus on just one verse that Mason read. He read a lot of verses, but we're going to focus in on one from our Bible reading. And it's from a speech that a man called Paul gave in the middle of a debate where people were arguing about things in the ancient city of Athens 2,000 years ago in this place called the Areopagus, this place where people went to debate different things. And this verse that we're going to read is verse 31. Let me read it to you. For he, that is God, has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. This is about two big news days. It's the resurrection of Jesus and the return of Jesus. And what this verse shows us is how the best news is not only the best news, but also the most important news. And I want us to think about that and how we respond to it. Do you know, this might surprise you. A survey was conducted 2 years ago in this country. 45% of people in this country believe that Jesus rose from the dead. 45% of adults believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, I hear that, and I suggest to you that the way that most people believe that Jesus rose from the dead is kind of the way that people believe in the planet Jupiter. They believe it's there because they've been told it's there, but it makes very little difference to their everyday life. If Jupiter was there or wasn't there, they wouldn't really be bothered. They wouldn't really notice any difference. It just doesn't really mean much to them. It just seems too far away and too remote. I want to suggest this, that we should believe in the resurrection of Jesus far more like the way we believe in the sun. The sun makes an absolutely massive difference to our everyday life. If the sun hadn't have risen this morning, we would have known about it. Every day we live by the light and the warmth of the sun, and if it was taken from us, it would be absolutely world-changing. So that's what I want us to think about for a few moments this morning. Now, kids, it's okay if you make a bit of noise. There's some worksheets for you and some colouring sheets, so you can get stuck into those. But especially if you're doing a worksheet, why don't you try and follow along with what I'm saying? Because there was a Sunday morning, just like this one, 2,000 years ago and 2,000 miles away, and it was in real time and space, in real history, when a real flesh and blood man rose from the dead. Now, I know that that sounds like a really outlandish and ridiculous thing to claim. We all know that people don't rise from the dead, don't we? That just doesn't happen. That's the kind of stuff that people make up in films. And as a trained lawyer, I like to think that I know how to use my mind to test claims that people make. That I don't just believe what people say without thinking about it, but I scrutinize things and to see if they're believable and true. Others in this church are doctors and are scientists, are specialists in research, who also like to use their minds. Don't just believe tall tales because other people tell them. And yet many of us here, and countless billions down through history and right across the world, have found this news, that Jesus rose from the dead, to be absolutely reliable and also the best news ever. Now, Paul says it so clearly in this religious debate. It's there in blue. God rose a man from the dead, and he's talking about Jesus. Jesus, who was just a relatively poor Jewish man from this small town in the middle of nowhere, the backwaters of Nazareth. He lived under the Roman Empire in the 1st century. And really, Jesus, at first look, would just seem like a bit of a nobody. There's nothing, he's not newsworthy in any way, really, but clearly something extraordinary happened around this person of Jesus. Just a few days after his very public and his very gruesome and humiliating death on a cross in the city of Jerusalem at the hands of the Roman soldiers, just after that, and people had seen him die, people started to claim that they had seen him alive and well. And at first, they weren't really believed, because why would you believe people? It was passed off as some desperate woman in their grief and some passionate friends playing make-believe, or maybe just a ghost trick. And yet the number of eyewitnesses grew from 3 to 11 to 25 to 500 at one time. And these encounters that these people were having and claiming to have with Jesus were all very real and physical, even just ordinary. He was doing things like showing off his scars to his mates. He was cooking a barbecue on the beach and serving his friends food. He was enjoying meals with them and eating with them. He was in small and intimate conversations. He was in public with big crowds speaking to them, hundreds of people there. And these eyewitnesses, they included what you'd call skeptics, people who don't really believe things that easily. They included doubters. They included accountants. They included lawyers. And even doctors came to believe. Many of them devoting the rest of their lives to sharing this best news ever with others. Many of them going to gruesome deaths defending that story, that belief in the best news ever that Jesus rose from the dead. Clearly something significant happened around this poor Jewish man, Jesus Christ. And here we are 15 years later when Paul is speaking in this city of Athens. At this point, loads and loads of the original eyewitnesses who actually physically met the risen Jesus are still kicking around, still telling their story to anyone who will listen. And Paul is here and he claims it straight up in an intellectual debate. Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Paul himself knows there is a compelling record of this. There's a compelling case for it. In fact, so much so, do you see what Paul says? He says, this is a matter of proof. This is a matter of proof. When you prove something, you give reasons for it. You convince someone. You give evidence. You're inviting it to be tested and approved. Now, the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, it can't be scientifically proven according to our modern scientific method, but most of the important things in life, the dearest things to us, can't be proved in that kind of way. It doesn't mean they're not real. But there's two ways that you can test and prove Jesus' resurrection. Firstly, it's a historical claim. It's not a myth, it's not a fable, it's not a legend or just a story. It's a claim of history, so it can be tested as history. And it's got very good, extremely reliable ancient historical accounts and records that we can look at. But secondly, we can test and prove this by personal experience. There is a living and breathing record for the fact that Jesus rose from the dead in the witness of the Christian experience and the lives of Christians in the church today. And so if you know a Christian, you can test this claim through them and their life. That's why Paul says the proof of Jesus rising from the dead is given to everyone. That includes all of us here today because you're hearing about it. You're hearing this message of the resurrection of Jesus. And all of us today, even if just in a small way, because we're in a church, have the chance to see and experience the difference that makes in real people's lives. But why is this the best news ever? Many of us, just like back in Paul's day, tend to wave Jesus off as just this great religious leader or this prophet that some people choose to follow. Or some people say, well, he's just a really impressive and talented miracle worker that some people are taken in by. Others like to say, well, no, Jesus is a good man. He's a real man in history. He's really good. He lived a good life. He shows us good values. And some people choose to copy him. But I want to say with respect that none of those options are really valid for us. I want to just sweep those options off the table this morning. If Jesus is all that he claims to be, and if he can do all he claims to offer, then either the news about him is the best thing ever, or the most dangerous news ever. Because if he isn't good for his word, if the proof just doesn't add up, then he isn't a good religious leader. He isn't a prophet who speaks truth. He isn't a good man showing us a good way. He's a trickster and he's a liar, and he's led countless people through history across the world and countless people in this room astray to base their lives on something that is a lie. And to such an epic and life-altering degree. That is not good. But because the life that Jesus lived and because the stuff he did and because of the claims that he made, including going way beyond what any other religious teacher or any other human has seriously claimed, in claiming himself to be God in human flesh, then either he is very good news or very bad news indeed. Now, for me, for my part, I think it's the best news ever. It's the best news ever that God himself came as a human, that God lived a perfect life, that God himself died on a cross to pay for my wrongs and my failures and my sins and rose to new everlasting life to remake me as the person that I know I'm meant to be and give me the life that I know I'm meant to live. And if that's true, then that means we live in a world where a resurrection actually happened in history, which means that resurrection life actually happens. And so it can for me too. So that means that death is not the end. It means my sins can be forgiven. It validates my hunger and my thirst for more, my desire for life to continue and to be full. And it means that there's some substance to my hope and my desire that one day I might be reunited with loved ones who have died in him. Now, all in all, that sounds like pretty good news to me, right? I hope it does to you. So I might have convinced you that this is the best news ever if it's true. But I also want us to see today why this is the most important news in life ever. Paul shows us here how these two big news days in history connect to one another. He says that the resurrection of Jesus from the dead is the proof that we need, that God has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. You see, the resurrection of Jesus has already happened. That's a historical fact. And that is to point us forward to a day when Jesus will return. It's a day that most certainly will happen, but has not yet happened. The one who has been appointed by God to return to judge the whole world, and that includes you and me, with all the knowledge and the goodness and the perfect righteousness of God and the justice of God. Now, I just want to say that sounds pretty important to me. If that is true, and that day is coming, then that sounds more like the sun than Jupiter in the scale of relevance to our everyday lives, doesn't it? See, the truth is, we are all reaching up to God in our own different ways, whether it's through living good lives, or maybe through following religious teachings in some way. Or for some of us, it's seeking fullness in life and whatever we can experience, or what stuff we can get, or what relationships we can have. They're all different ways of us reaching up to God in the life we have in him. We are searching for God and experience of him. All of us are. But to so many of us, did you hear what Mason read in Paul's little speech? God remains unknown. He remains elusive. It's as if God's playing this kind of cosmic game of hide and seek with us. And we're seeking and he's hiding. It's just there's no fun and laughter when it goes like that. But Jesus reassures us of this. The person of Jesus reassures us that God not only wants to be found by us, but actually it's the other way round. As we heard in the rest of Paul's speech earlier, Jesus is the one, the God of the whole universe, the God who made us, the God who holds our lives in his hands moment by moment, the God who gave you the breath that you just breathed. And he's just given you the next one that you've just breathed. Jesus is the one that God has set aside, that God has appointed and chosen to be the judge of the whole world. He is the one who comes from God to us, to open up the way to God for us. It is Jesus who is out seeking and saving the lost, and it turns out we are the ones who are hiding from him. You see, sometimes we don't realize that the best news is also the most important news. Let me say, do not make that mistake here today. Don't make that mistake. What I am now sharing with you is not only the best news ever, but also the most important news you could ever and will ever hear. Because 40 days after Jesus rose from the dead, he ascended up to heaven the control room of the universe. And the promise here is that there has been a day set by God and known only to God when Jesus will return from heaven to earth, and he will judge all of us, every single one of us, with the justice of God. And if that day is coming, and let me say that day could be tomorrow, if that day is coming, it sounds pretty important to me that we are ready for it and we are prepared. I don't know if you've ever had that dream that's really a nightmare. When you've got an exam at school or you've got a presentation at work or something, and it's just about to start and you realize you aren't prepared. You haven't revised or you've lost your notes and you just get really worried. The resurrection of Jesus is meant to help us be prepared. It's meant to get ready for the biggest day of our lives, the biggest day of history, so we aren't caught out by it, so it doesn't become a nightmare for us. Now, I know this talk of the day of judgment to end history doesn't sound like a lot of fun. It maybe sounds full on, even scaremongering to you, but do we all not long at heart for a day of ultimate and final justice? Are we not all craving for a justice in this world that we know that the courts and the authorities and the governments and the institutions of this world cannot seem to deliver? That sense deep within us, that hungering and thirsting for what is right and good to be done in the end. And the promise of Easter is the best, the most important news ever, that day is coming, that there is a God of justice who will see that justice is done in the world in the end. And it will come through one man who is good enough and who is powerful enough and who is knowledgeable enough to see that right is done in his world. One man who is good enough to see that the fullness of life that he has for this world is brought to bear. And that is why Easter holds the best and the most important news ever. And so I just want us to think as I close, how will you respond? For surely this news, surely these claims are worthy of a response. Surely this is worthy more than just a shrug of the shoulders and, oh, that was nice to go to church on Easter Day and hear what that guy at the front had to say. Have a great day, kind of nothing-y response. Good for you. I'm just going to get on with my life. Surely this deserves more than that. Don't be like so many of the 45% of the UK population who believe the resurrection of Jesus happened, but live as if it makes absolutely no difference to their life whatsoever. Listen, either discount this as ridiculous, either just laugh at me and mock me for being so foolish, or take this seriously. Hear this news and act like it's true. There were 3 responses to Paul when he gave this speech in Athens. The first people basically said, that just sounds foolish. They sneered at him. This talk and these claims that people are making of the resurrection of the dead, that's just ridiculous. You're a fool. Do you know what? That is a legitimate response. At least if you act like that, I know that you've heard me. But there's a second response that's possible. And it's that you might want to find out more. And others back then wanted to find out more. And now if that's you, then come back to church and hear more about this. We talk about this week after week after week. Ask a friend here some questions. Ask them, like, do you agree with what that guy at the front said? That sounded pretty mental to me. Ask a friend. Read the Bible. We've got some books that we'd love to give you today. Micah's got them, and he'll make sure they're available to you. You could take some books away to read. Or if you want, scan this QR code, and there's some posters up around with it, so you can grab it later as well. And it's a chance to get a bit more information about a course we'll be running in the next couple of months where you can find out more. But if you want to find out more, then take the step into that. Don't just let that be. And here's the third and final response that some of us might fit into. For some, maybe today is the day to follow Jesus in faith. Maybe today is the day to believe this best, most important news ever and to turn your whole life around. To turn away from what you're living for at the moment, to trust in Jesus and to follow him through all of life, for all of life. Now, if that's you, I want to encourage you. We're going to sing in a moment. I'll ask the band to come back up. And as we sing, in your heart, you can just speak to God and he will hear, and pray to him and turn back to him and turn away from what you've been living for and ask him to save you and to help you live for him. And then if you do that, please speak to someone here. Speak to a friend or a family member, or come speak to me, and we'll help you in what follows next. But let's pray together before we sing. Jesus, I thank you and I praise you, for you are alive today. You are in heaven, having rose from the dead that first Easter. Jesus, I thank you and praise you that you are coming back one day to judge the living and the dead. There is a day of justice that will bring history to a close and bring in your new world. Lord, I pray that each and every person in this room will be ready for that day. I pray that we would realize the greatness of this news and also the seriousness of this news today. Would each of us come to put our faith and trust in you and you alone. Amen.